Tag Schecter's agency is trying to help out Kyle Busch find some sponsorship for 2023, and many drivers, including Chase Elliott, criticized Texas Motor Speedway and asked what can change with the All-Star Race format. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off paint schemes and sponsorship news first. Let's jump into those really quickly. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is BJ McLeod's 2022 Circle B Diecast scheme that we're going to see next weekend at the Coca-Cola 600. I think this paint scheme actually looks really good in my opinion. I like basically I do love the colors they have on it. I love the yellow and the orange and all the colors that match together. I think it actually looks really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing the racetrack next weekend at Charlotte. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Landon Castle's 2022 Shelton Energy Solutions scheme that we see this weekend at the All-Star Race, which he'll have to qualify his way into the race. This paint scheme actually looks really solid in my opinion, and great to see that Landon Castle has a new sponsor that is working with him. Maybe they're going to sponsor him in the Xfinity Series, I'm not sure, but great to see that Shelton Energies is sponsoring Landon Castle. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Preece's 2022 Morton Building scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This is a really good looking paint scheme in my honest opinion. I love the color variation on it. I think it looks awesome, and I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing on the racetrack here this weekend at Texas. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brandon Jones' 2022 Delta Faucet's Menard scheme that we're going to see this weekend in the Xfinity Series race. There's really not much to say here in my opinion. It's basically the same color variations of all the Menards colors. It's just basically a different sponsor on the front. It's great though that they have Delta Faucet sponsoring. It's not much to say here about the scheme. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Carson Oswar's 2022 Sparko scheme that we'll receive this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme actually looks really solid in my opinion. I love the Sparkos back in the Truck Series to sponsor Carson Oswar. I think they sponsored Carson in the past, so it's really great that a returning sponsor is coming back, and glad to see a Sparko is sponsoring Carson Oswar. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Lawes Allen's 2022 Texas Asphalt scheme that we'll see this weekend at Texas. This paint scheme's, in my opinion, I'm not an overall big fan of it. I think there's a little bit too much going on for this one, in my honest opinion, but I'm glad to see he has a new sponsor working with him. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chris Wright's 2022 America's Auto Auction scheme that we'll see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. Overall, I think this paint scheme does look pretty decent in my opinion. I think it's definitely better than a Lawes Allen's for sure. It's not my favorite Chris Wright scheme I've seen this year, but it's definitely different, and we'll see it at the racetrack tonight at Texas. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2022 Jag Metals LLC scheme that we're going to see this weekend here in the Xfinity Series race at Texas. Very different than what we've seen for Tyler Reddick in the past. It's also a much different looking big machine racing scheme that we've seen. They're changing it up this weekend. I think it's a little different, and glad to see Jag Metals is sponsoring Tyler Reddick this weekend. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Massey's 2022 SPL Asphalt LLC scheme that we see this weekend in the Truck Series race this weekend. I absolutely like this paint scheme. I think it looks really good for the Xfinity Series race, I should say. I think it actually looks pretty good, and it's different color variations. I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack here this weekend, the Xfinity Series race tomorrow. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Armani Williams' 2022 Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation scheme that we'll receive this weekend at the Truck Series race, actually tonight. This is a pretty decent looking paint scheme in my opinion. I love the Armani Williams. It's making, I believe this is second or third NASCAR Truck Series start, so good luck to him on that. I think it actually looks pretty good, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Vargas' 2022 Twin Liquor scheme that we'll receive this weekend here at Texas Motor Speedway. This one's actually different. The last one that they ran at COTA was actually a red-looking color. This one's got a black background, which I actually like this black background a lot. I think it actually fits this car really well, and I think this is definitely one of my favorite Ryan Vargas schemes that I've seen this year. I've seen a lot of good ones, but I think this does look pretty good in my honest opinion. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is My Snyder's 2022 Superior SX scheme that we'll see this weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme is pretty good in my opinion. Really cool that My Snyder does have a new sponsor to work with them, Superior SX. This is the first time that Superior SX is sponsoring the season, so I think it does look pretty good, and I'm looking forward to seeing the racetrack here in the Xfinity Series race at Texas Motor Speedway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Garrett Smith's 2022 Trophy Tractor scheme that we're going to see in the Truck Series race tonight at Texas Motor Speedway. Pretty awesome with Trophy Tractors jumping on to sponsor Garrett Smith. Really cool the sponsors being able to commit, and we'll see it tonight at the Truck Series race at Texas Motor Speedway. And the final paint scheme we are taking a look at is Jesse Little's 2022 Race City Sports Memorabilia scheme that we're going to see this weekend and actually tonight in the Truck Series race at Texas Motor Speedway. This paint scheme actually looks really, really cool in my opinion. I'm glad to see that Jesse Little is back in the Camping World Truck Series. I think he's going to do a really, really awesome job. And again, I'm very excited to see that he's back. I think he'll do really solid, and I think his paint scheme does look really good in my opinion. It looks really, really awesome. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Kurt Busch. Now, there's been a lot of questions about his winning car from this past weekend and if it was going to be produced or not. Lionel and Plan B have been trying to get that done for a while, but we did not get confirmation it was going to happen until yesterday. It was officially revealed that Kurt Busch's The Jordan brand car is now available from both Lionel and I also believe Plan B Sales and Circle B are all going to be producing Kurt Busch's Jordan brand scheme. I am absolutely happy to see that this car is getting produced. And I will tell you right now that I think there's a very, very high possibility and a very high chance that this could end up being the best-selling scheme that we've seen from Lionel ever. I think it's going to be a really high profitable one, and I think it will be probably the best-selling. If not the best, I think it will be one of the best-selling paint schemes, best diecast we have ever seen. It's a shame a lot of the diecasts that are not getting produced this year, but if there's one I'm really happy that's getting done this year, I'm very happy that this one is getting done. I think it's important for this one to happen, and again, I'm very glad to see that they're producing this diecast. I think it's really, really awesome looking, and I'm absolutely looking forward to see that they're bringing this diecast back. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Resin Compound. Now, there's been a lot of questions about if Resin Compound is going to get applied to Texas Motor Speedway or not. Well, we got official confirmation yesterday, and Bob Pockers reported that there's going to be a live spray of Resin Compound that is going to be applied at Texas Motor Speedway, where basically the Tire Dragon is. Now, a lot of people are going to be really, really concerned about Resin and PJ1. There's actually a major difference between Resin and PJ1. PJ1 is a really bad sticky stuff that's still Texas Motor Speedway. Resin Compound is basically pretty much just the stuff that kind of can grip the track up much, much quicker and make the track really, really gripped up. It might be a little loose when you get into it at first, but the more you get up on there and run it, the more it will grip up, and it will create an extra lane for racing to happen. So that's one thing about Resin Compound. So hopefully Texas can put on a good show, especially with news we'll talk about a little bit here later in the episode. But overall, hopefully can put on a really, really good show, and I'm glad to see it. I'm not really happy they're adding Resin Compound, but they're applying it, and it is what it is. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the tires for the AllStars. Now, basically in regards to the tire rules that are going to be for the AllStars. So, Cup teams will get 4 sets of stickers and 1 set of qualifying scuffs for the AllStar race, meaning that after every stage, if you have to change, you will eventually have to go on scuffs since there's 3 or 4 stages. This, of course, is for the one thing that will probably give advantage to ones eliminated is they'll basically run on the qualifying. Remember, there is an elimination bracket this year for the AllStars when it comes to qualifying, which is going to be tomorrow. There's going to be a qualifying format that if you make it to the second round, basically make it round 2, it's going to be an elimination style format. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with these tires, if they're going to wear it or not. Texas is a track that's not known to really wear tires, but it is a different, basically they're running the same tires that they ran at Kansas, and the tires absolutely wore much faster Kansas than we initially thought. We're in between 20 and 25 laps, so that could be an issue going forward. We'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but that is the tires situation for the AllStar race. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the wheel policy for the AllStar race. So, it was also reported by Bob Pockers yesterday that if a wheel falls off during the elimination qualifying, cars will start at the rear for the race. There will be no plans for a 4-race suspension in regards to that. Now, if it happens during the race, it'll be to be determined on a case-by-case basis. This is definitely really, really interesting that if they're doing something a little different when it comes to the wheel policies for this race. And again, they're saying it's on a case-by-case basis because we've seen a lot of times this year, especially where wheels have become a major, major problem. And NASCAR has sent down teams for race suspensions really through this year. I mean, we're going to talk about one of these teams that has been affected by 4 race suspensions so far this season here just near the end of this episode. But I think it's really interesting that they decided to change at least the rules just a little bit for this race. I think it makes sense for them to make some changes to those rules, but at the same token, I understand why people are probably upset they made some changes to those rules for this race. And now we're going into on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about running races at the finish. Now, someone basically brought out a really interesting and a really good article about drivers who are finishing and running at the finish. Now, they don't entirely take into account that some of these DNFs are mechanical issues, but this is at some interesting stats that I found out. So, Cody Ware, of course, has the highest percentage of races not run at the finish. He's only finished 44 out of his 66 starts in the Cup Series, meaning he's only finished 2/3 of his starts. Ouch, not really impressive. Some of those, yes, are mechanical issues, but a lot of us are wrecks that he's been involved in. And I know that a lot of people are going to defend Cody Ware for this, but honestly, having that many DNFs in a short amount of time really is not the greatest look for you, in my opinion. Now, jumping over to Ty Dillon. Ty Dillon's really shocking. He has the second lowest percentage, despite a lot of people thinking he isn't talented. Ty Dillon actually has the second lowest percentage of Cup Series drivers, which completing 163 out of 177 starts, meaning I believe he's only had 8% of races in his career where he hasn't finished, which is really impressive. Then you go to Kevin Harvick, and Kevin Harvick is definitely no surprise. He's only had 5% of his races where he's not finished, and he's completed 723 out of 765 starts in the NASCAR Cup Series. I found it really interesting. If you want to go check that article out, I think it's a really awesome, a really good piece on basically drivers running at the finish. Josh Wiggy did point out a little bit, though, that there's some very major things that really weren't pointed out, which I think is very true, basically about DNS could be mechanical and stuff, and it's not all wrecks. But at the same token, in the same time, I think it's definitely really interesting they bring up those facts for this suggestions. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the All-Star Race and the participants and the dignitaries. Now, a lot of the dignitaries that are basically going to be in this are not very relevant. There's 3 major key players that are going to be at this. So, Blake Shelton, who is going to be forming a pre-race concert before the race, the All-Star Race happens, he will be the Grand Marshal. The one that's got a lot of controversy we'll talk about in a minute, Greg Abbott is going to fly the green flag, and Raylan is going to do the national anthem. Now, Greg Abbott doing the green flag will be waving it from pit road. Oh boy, this was definitely where Twitter got a major firestorm very recently. Look, governors have been at races before. It's nothing new. We've seen governors at tracks. Ron DeSantis waved the green flag in 2020 at Homestead. We've seen, of course, Governor Sanara from New Hampshire show up. Even Roy Cooper very recently was helping out North Wilkesboro and trying to get that track. And Gavin Newsom was at the LA Clash race. But here's the thing. A lot of those people besides Ron DeSantis, they weren't officially associated as a dignitary of the track. Greg Abbott, especially if his controversial stance I'm not going to get into here, so I'm not really in the politics side of things. Greg Abbott's stances are very controversial and people do not agree with. And NASCAR said that they're trying to be out of politics, but I'm not entirely blaming NASCAR for this. Blame SMI Texas Motors Hewitt. Texas already has a bad reputation, and already a lot of people are not even going to be watching this race now because Greg Abbott's going to be there. NASCAR and Texas really shot yourself in the foot, and they honestly need to change some things going forward with this event. And honestly, we'll talk about some of the All-Stars changes. And one thing is not having a controversial figure be waving your green flag. Yes, it's a green flag for fuck's sakes, but come on, in all seriousness, in all honesty, it's a little frustrating that they absolutely did that, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Ford. Now, basically multiple individuals we haven't really talked about as much, but Ford this year has generally been really struggling so far in 2022, including Stewart-Haas Racing. Now, Stewart-Haas Racing so far this year has 1 victory so far in the 2022 season, with coming with Chase Briscoe. But other than that, the team has been really quiet, and Chase Briscoe, honestly, hasn't really hit or miss so far this year. Ronnie Childers was asked a question about Ford's struggles, and he basically explained some of the struggles, and even I think Brian Murphy, who works at Stewart-Haas Racing, he kind of brought out a chart. So, he says Ronnie Childers says that it could be a driver, could be downforce, drag, horsepower, better setups, and pit stops. He basically said it can figure out where the issues are. I think he's really trying to reference still downforce and the drag. Ford had to basically change their nose before the season began, and Ford was really good at the super speedway tracks, but besides maybe Ryan Blaney and a couple other Fords this year, Ford has generally struggled on the bigger tracks, and I think that the nose change really has made some effects toward why I think Ford might be struggling just a little bit. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, and I could be entirely wrong, but I think Ford's struggles could be because of that reason and that major reason alone. So, Ford definitely has some work to do when it comes to their struggles that they've had this year. They've got some things that they absolutely need to fix going forward, and maybe we'll see them fix those changes, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure if Ford is going to be able to fix those changes that they need to basically make. So the changes they need to make are pretty drastic and pretty quickly need to happen going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about New York and F1. Now, yesterday it was reported by Adam Stern that he reports that Eric Adams had offered F1 a site to run a race, but Greg Maffei says a fourth U.S. race is unlikely and the site is not ideal. Now, you can read the article. The chart came up, and basically I kind of agree with Greg Maffei here. And honestly, I understand what Eric Adams is trying to do. Formula 1 is absolutely growing in the United States. I know basically last year talking about maybe trying to go out to New York. But I think right now F1 needs to be really, really smart. And I think 3 races is absolutely the max that F1 needs to have. And people saying, oh, F1 should only have 2 races. Well, back in the 1980s, we had 3 U.S. races for Formula 1, when Formula 1 was pretty booming back in the 1980s. Having a 4th race, though, is going to be really too much oversaturation and too much Americanization. Yes, Liberty Media probably wants to make those changes, but also Liberty Media and Greg Maffei have said very recently as well, they're looking to maybe try to go out to South Africa and race in that country, race around the Johannesburg area, trying to race in that area. And I think that going to a 4th track right now, when Eric Adams needs to focus on a lot of stuff they're going on in the city right now, basically, I think a 4th Formula 1 race at the moment in the U.S. really would not be a smart decision, because I think you're going to be oversaturating the market, and especially with the costs and stuff, people are not going to be willing to go to all these races, and you're going to have issues with attendance. And I think another thing that could play a major factor is how long does Formula 1 really stay in this boom. I think there's a possibility it could stay around for a long time, but you also have to think about that NASCAR we thought was going to be around for ages in this boom, and it kind of fell off. So you have to think about, is Formula 1 going to continue this major trend and having this big boom of popularity or not? That's one thing that's going to be determined going forward long term. But in all honesty and all seriousness, I do think that we may not see many changes going forward on that front. So we'll wait to generally see what happens in that, and we're not going to be seeing a race there in the future. But it's very interesting they were looking to try to maybe bring a 4th race for Formula 1 to the United States. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Parker Chase. As Parker Chase is going to be returning to the NASCAR Xfinity Series, driving the number 26 for Sam Hunt Racing this weekend, next weekend, well, 2 weekends from now at Portland. Of course, it's also going to be a weekend where Gateway, the Truck Series, and Cup Series will be racing at Gateway. Parker Chase, I believe, will be making his first or second start with this organization this season. Parker Chase, of course, been driving for Venturi Motorsports in the ARCA Series. This year he's been getting more experience in ARCA on the oval tracks. Has had some decent success, but really hasn't been the most successful. Where Parker Chase generally really shines is on road course. And of course, he's come from the IMSA programs, basically he's come from the GT programs in IMSA, which the Xfinity cars are not entirely similar to that. They're basically our Gen 6 cars currently at the moment. This is a pretty good car. We've seen Sam Hunt Racing contend for victories, and we've seen John Nemechek nearly win races with Sam Hunt Racing, and he's done generally really, really well with Sam Hunt Racing over the years. And I think it's good to see that Parker Chase is back behind the wheel in his 26 car. What are my expectations for Parker Chase? Parker Chase, I think, needs to go for top 20. I know those are high expectations for a driver who doesn't have a lot of experience. We've seen those Sam Hunt Racing cars capable of top 20s. If you can't get a top 20, that's a little bit disappointing. So I think he's going to be capable of getting a top 20 this weekend. I think he's a good enough driver to get it done, and I think he's got a good shot of getting a top 20 this weekend here not next weekend, but a couple weekends from now at Portland Raceway. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Denny Hamlin. Now, we've talked about this on the channel many, many times in regards to Denny Hamlin and their penalty. Now, for those who don't remember, basically Denny Hamlin's team had at the time had a 4-race suspension. At the time, basically quintessentially for the fact at the time that basically a wheel came off at Dover. And about a couple days after, they announced that they were going to appeal the penalties because of how big the suspension was. Well, we finally got the answers in regards to those penalties, and it was revealed yesterday that when it comes to their penalty is upheld for the 11 team, and it will naturally be the next 4 points-paying races and not counting the AllStar race. So, the next 4 points-paying races, of course, being Charlotte, Roy Technology Raceway Gateway, Sonoma, and Nashville. Meaning that they've updated the penalties and basically saying the NASCAR is basically kind of charging them a little bit more they probably wanted. They probably wanted to have that AllStar race where they could come back and have Nashville, but at the same token, you do have that pit stop challenge, so they probably wanted all the teams to be out there. I think it's a right call that NASCAR made, especially when it comes to the 4-race suspensions. It's not a surprise. I expected that NASCAR was going to uphold those penalties. It's such a major rule that NASCAR has with the 4-race suspensions that it's not a surprise. But I will say one thing when it comes to those 4-race suspensions, it absolutely needs to change. I understand that it's very dangerous to have a wheel come off your car. If a wheel comes off your car, it could go on the racetrack and it could damage a lot of other cars, and a lot of people can get really, really hurt. And basically, if a car hits it on the track, it could go up in the grandstands and hurt somebody, and we don't really know the repercussions that really could come off of that if a tire does go up there. But here's another major problem that kind of arises when it comes to this too. I think especially one of my big gripes I've had really throughout this, if you watch my channel, I think the suspensions need to be reduced from 4 races to 2 races. I think suspensions need to be a thing, but I think 4-race suspensions are too much. Because when you take out the good people on your team, because when you basically, and they, by the way, took out the wrong person, by the way, Blake Houston should not be getting suspended for 4 races, just as Blake Houston on that one. But basically, when you take out your best guys and your main guys, those are the main people on your team. And we take those guys out and suspend them, you bring in B-tier people who could have more loose wheels. And that could really hurt a team and cause more suspensions for the team, which could play a major factor into that. And then, again, it's the right call in NASCAR. I mean, I just think that there needs to be an update on those penalties going forward. I know some people may disagree with me on that front, but I do believe that NASCAR absolutely needs to go ahead and update those penalty rules, because I think it would be a good decision, and NASCAR went ahead and updated those penalty rules going forward in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Larry McReynolds. As there is revealed, and Bob Pockrass basically answered a question in regards to who's going to be in the Fox Sports booth this weekend at the AllStar Race. And Bob Pockrass says that Larry McReynolds is going to be back in the Fox Sports booth this weekend at the AllStar Race. This will be technically the third race that Larry McReynolds has covered. He covered the duels earlier this year and covered his first points-paying race of the year at Dover, and will be back for the AllStar Race weekend. I think Larry McReynolds coming back into the booth, I think, is a really, really great decision. He's in one of the better ones we've seen so far this year when it comes to the Fox Sports booth. And I think when he left the booth many years ago, people basically assumed that Larry did not want to travel on the road and basically do it anymore, and that's why he left, which was not the case whatsoever. They really wanted Jeff Gordon in the booth. Larry McReynolds basically came back to the booth and has really done amazing. He's one of the better people at Fox and does an amazing job regardless of where you put him at. And having him in the booth and having that energy, someone who can be really, really calm, but also can have jokes from time to time and stuff, I think is really, really important. He brings that major analytical side, and honestly, you'll have the crew chief, the driver, and the commentator side of things. It'll basically work very, very well together. Now, one thing I absolutely would like to see change is Clint Boyer out of the booth and have Jamie McMurray and Larry McReynolds. I know that Denny Hamlin was vouching that they put Larry and basically put Jamie McMurray in the booth. What I want to see is I want to see Larry and Jamie in the booth to max, working Mike Joyce. I think that chemistry could flow together very, very well. And they've all worked together for many, many years and have had a lot of experience working together. So I think it would gel better. And if you can keep Clint Boyer working at Fox Sports, but not working as, like, on the side. Do basically kind of get in that role that Chris Myers is in and kind of do the pre-race stuff. But in my honest opinion, I think that's what we need to change. But back to having Larry McReynolds in the booth, I'm super pumped and super excited Larry McReynolds is going to be back in the Fox Sports booth. I think he's done absolutely an amazing, incredible job when he's been with Fox, and I think absolutely having him back in the Fox Sports booth is absolutely amazing and absolutely awesome, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the AllStar Race. Now, of course, this weekend is going to be the AllStar Race, and drivers were asked about, basically we're talking about the AllStar Race and what they would like to see change. Drivers really had a major consensus, but other drivers were a lot more vocal, including Chase Elliott. William Byron was the first one they talked to, and basically says we need to rotate the races and change where we go, and talk about how Bristol was really, really successful. Changing, rotating races is the way to go. Austin Dillon basically kind of echoed that and basically says the same thing. We need to rotate it. We could also go back to Charlotte if we want to. And he says, honestly, Texas has not provided the greatest racing. Kyle Larson basically says that not only should we change the All-Star race, we also should change the championship race. It should also be moved around as well, which I absolutely agree with Kyle Larson on that front. They need to not only change the All-Star race, but they need to change the championship race. Denny Hamlin basically says we need to update how we do the kind of the All-Star race, and he says $1 million really doesn't matter as much as it used to, and we need to rotate the tracks as well. But the one person that got everybody really, really talking and kind of riled up is Chase Elliott. Chase Elliott says that we basically rotate the All-Star race, said the Bristol race was fun, and he said, honestly, get away from Texas Motor Speedway, and the less we have to be at Texas Motor Speedway, the better it's going to be. Now, I absolutely 100% agree with every single driver The AllStar Race absolutely needs to be updated, and there needs to be rotation. Also agree with the championship race needs to be rotated as well. And NASCAR really is the only sport that really has an all-star game or all-star moment where it's basically been at the same track. The All-Star Race was designed to move to different racetracks. For the first years, they basically did that. They had the All-Star Race at Charlotte for the first year, and then in 1986, they moved it to Atlanta Motor Speedway. Their original plan was that they were basically rotated every single year. But from 1987 up to about 2019, they basically had the All-Star Race at Charlotte Motor Speedway and didn't really even make any changes around that. And honestly, I think that what needs to happen is they need to rotate where we go. And honestly, getting away from Texas Motor Speedway will be a really, really good thing. Now, it would have to probably be SMI tracks if they were going to rotate it, but maybe NASCAR could find a way to incorporate and not just have SMI, but ISC tracks as well. There are so many good tracks that absolutely are available, and another track that would definitely be available if SMI get it back up, North Wilkesboro. North Wilkesboro would be an amazing track to have as an All-Star Race, but I absolutely agree that the All-Star Race needs to change. The All-Star Race, in my honest opinion, really over the last couple years especially, has really lost its luster. I used to be a huge fan of the All-Star Race, and I remember back in 2009, that incredible last 10 laps of that race, the incredible fun racing where Tony Stewart won his first ever All-Star Race and won technically his first race with Stewart-Haas Racing, and the success of that team. Of course, it's Tony Stewart's birthday today, so happy birthday to Stewart, by the way. But I also remember back in 2011, Carl Edwards won. In 2007, the controversy around that. The race still has lost its luster since 2013. I know they've tried to make changes over the years. They had that basically really restricted package in 2018 where basically put a super speedway track on basically drugs pretty much. Of course, in 2019 had basically make some changes on the front. That was a good race in 2019 that Kyle Larson won. Then in 2020, they had the numbers move farther back and the glowing lights, and they had it at Bristol. And last year, they had really wacky and crazy format. This year's kind of more of a straightforward format with some changes. I honestly absolutely agree here. There absolutely do need to be changes when it comes to the All-Star Race format going forward. And can we please rotate the track and get away from Texas Motor Speedway? And honestly, I don't like Texas Motor Speedway. I know maybe we'll have a good race with Texas, but I really believe we need to get out of Texas Motor Speedway because the sooner we can get out of Texas Motor Speedway, the better it's going to be, and hopefully in the future we stop racing at Texas. But the All-Star Race needs to change. There has to be changes to the All-Star Race, and I do hope going forward NASCAR is listening to me, and hopefully they can change the All-Star Race in the future. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, and this is really the big one, is Kyle Busch and Joe Gibbs Racing his future at Joe Gibbs Racing. Now, I've not really reacted to much news in regards to this over the last couple weeks, but we're going to start off with David Wilson's comments. A couple of days ago, David Wilson, we talked about some comments about the Le Mans 24-hour situation. One thing that I forgot to talk about was Kyle Busch and his potential of maybe returning to Joe Gibbs Racing. David Wilson says it would be unacceptable to lose Kyle Busch. Now, he does mention that basically Kyle Busch has brought in, I think, 36% of their all-time winnings. He's won a lot of Xfinity Series races, a lot of Truck Series races for Joe Gibbs Racing, and has had a very successful program, and he said it'd be very unacceptable. And basically says that not only is he wanting back, but Kyle Busch also wants to return to the team, and Joe Gibbs wants to return. But sponsorship is going to be a major, major key to really helping him out if he wants to return to the team or not. So very recently, yesterday, Adam Stern had a couple reports come out, and he basically says that Joe Gibbs Racing has hired JTG's owner, Tad Geschechter's marketing agency to sell sponsorship. Now, Tad Geschechter basically has a really, really big B2B deal with Kroger, where a lot of the Kroger brands could come into play. So maybe Kroger is the one that maybe they're looking at, but it's interesting they brought Tad Geschechter in to help out. But in that article, it was reported in the articles, one Adam Stern later reported, he says that Joe Gibbs Racing is said to be in advanced talks with a major tech company for a one-year deal for the number 18 per sources. But JGR president says the relationship with Tad Geschechter's agent will extend beyond just filling the car's inventory. Now, what could this major tech company be? Because for a very long time, we've been thinking that basically it was going to basically be Menards is going to be the brand because they've sponsored Kyle Busch. What is it going to be? A major tech company? That's one thing I'm thinking about. Maybe could it be Yahoo perhaps? Yahoo is a major B2B deal with Toyota. Yahoo does have a major tech company. Maybe it's them. Maybe it's Sony. Sony, I know, has had a relationship with Joey Logano past with GameStop when Joey Logano was at the team. Maybe Sony and PlayStation are looking, and maybe GameStop perhaps is maybe looking at being a sponsor for Kyle Busch. Maybe it's Google for all we know. Google's a major tech company. They've been expanding in the world of motorsports. They're sponsoring McLaren. Maybe it's Google that's jumping to play. I really, really don't know. But you have to think about speculation as well going forward. I know that everyone wants Kyle Busch returning. I'm still very leaning toward Kyle Busch returning to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2023. I think he will be back. I just think a lot of people also assume basically, oh, is JTG-Daugherty also still in their organization? Package at their agency is basically trying to help Kyle Busch. And basically what I'm going to say here is, you know that you want all these teams basically wanting Kyle Busch back in this car when you have all these major companies and brands trying to help out Kyle Busch find sponsorship and funding. I think that's one thing you have to notice. They have a Tag of Shinkers company trying to help out and a lot of different companies coming into play. But you also do have to somewhat think about as well the future of Kyle Busch. If he doesn't return to Joe Gibbs Racing next year, what team does he go to? There's going to be a lot of teams that are probably going to be opened up next year. Maybe Haas Racing perhaps could be an organization he goes to. That 10 car is going to be available next year. What if he goes to the 10 car? Who really knows at this point? The 10 car could be available. What about the 7 car for Spire Motorsports? What about a third 2311 racing car? We know the 2311 wants to expand once again for 2023. You've heard that through the grapevine that they maybe were looking to expand. Who really knows? But I'm still leaning toward that Kyle Busch is going to find a sponsor. I think what really is going on is they're really trying to find a sponsor for Kyle Busch. They're really begging. And David Wilson even said that basically he's asking Joe Gibbs every day, what's going on with Kyle Busch? What's the status on Kyle Busch? Because he knows that Kyle Busch has been so successful for Joe Gibbs Racing. If they lose Kyle Busch, not only are you going to lose just Kyle Busch out of Joe Gibbs Racing, you're also quintessentially going to lose KBM because KBM will go wherever Kyle Busch goes and they'll switch manufacturers, and you're going to lose a huge development part of your team because Kyle Busch Motorsports has been a huge development program for their organizations. William Byron, Noah Grayson, Eric Jones, a lot of Christopher Bell have all come from that pipeline. Corey Himes coming through that pipeline right now. A lot of drivers are coming through that pipeline. Todd Gillen's come through that pipeline and been really, really successful. And I just think that you have to look at this, that I think that, again, I still am leaning toward that he will be back with Joe Gibbs Racing in 2023. I think he will be back with a team. But the huge question is what sponsor is going to work with Kyle Busch? That's something they have to wait and see because they said if he leaves Joe Gibbs, it's just going to be unacceptable. So we're going to generally have to wait and see what happens going forward. Who's going to be willing to sponsor Kyle Busch? Will it be Kroger? Will it be that major tech company you're thinking about? What if it's Xbox? What if it's Microsoft? Microsoft's a huge tech company. What if it is Microsoft? Microsoft does have major branding. They've been sponsoring a lot of people. Why not Microsoft come over? They've sponsored, I believe they sponsored Henry Motorsports in the past. So why not? And honestly, I just don't think it will be just that company. I think they're trying to get a company that's going to sponsor $20-25 million. That's the general price, asking price they're wanting on Kyle Busch, because Kyle Busch is basically a guy who brings a lot of money in. But I don't think it'll just be that company. I think you'll have some B2B deals. Interstate Batteries will probably come in and sponsor Kyle Busch next year. You've got the Walt Stanley. They're probably willing to foot the bill a little bit. But Joe Gibbs is not going to want to foot $20-30 million, and he's already probably footing a big bill for his grandson, Ty Gibbs. Now, you can think about Ty Gibbs as well. Could he replace Kyle Busch in the future? That's one thing to watch and see. But I still am leaning toward a Kyle Busch will be back in 2023, and they're still looking to get a sponsorship for Kyle Busch here for 2023. So, anyway, that's today's NASCAR and motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on pages on list to blow over that, and comment your thoughts on today's video. Do you think that Kyle Busch will be back with Joe Gibbs Racing in 2023? And if so, what sponsor do you think will sponsor? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the drivers criticizing the AllStars? And do you agree with them that they should probably go ahead and change up basically the AllStars going forward? Let me know in the comments below. Right now, I'm not entirely sure what's coming out tomorrow on the channel. It could be a NASCAR Xfinity Series race view, but keep your notification tabs on. I'm going to try to have a video out tomorrow regardless. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.